Controversial subjects with the facts can be tense, but we are a science here to make things make sense.
All right, so today we are going to be talking about protesting from a scientific perspective, from obviously our perspective.
You just said scientifics as if a British person would say maths.
Scientifics, I think
we got to go to scientifics class, don't we?
But yeah, there are a lot of different protests happening all over the world right now. Some for very just reasons, which we agree with, and some that have been silly over the last little bit.
What do you mean, Mitch?
But like people protesting having to wear masks. That's what I mean, Greg.
Okay, no, wait, I was just trying to like clarify for the viewer.
I thought you were calling me out. I was like, wait, do you agree with those?
No, I just wanted because someone listening could maybe not know what your opinion is. Obviously, you're like, fair. I think Black Lives Matter.
Yes,
I think
Black Lives Matter. I'm talking about the fact that there are millions of people around the world that are protesting for the civil rights of Black people to not have to be afraid of dying at the hands of police. But we're going to talk about a handful of things today. Do you want to do your study first, or do you want me to start, or do we want to talk a little more broadly first?
I mean, I can start, but yeah, we were just at a protest. I was gonna say, like, what's the last protest? What's the first protest you ever went to?
Oh,
I mean, that protest is an interesting word.
Yeah,
you're like when I tweeted for the first time.
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't engage that much as a younger person. Like, I grew up in a smaller town and my family wasn't that politically engaged. So I feel like you have stories from when you were very young going to protests. Is that true?
I mean, maybe not very young, but I do remember like viscerally my first protest because I was brought by my parents, and it is an interesting thing that humans do that it's like a memory I have. You know what I mean? Like, I think it might have been grade 6 or 7 when teachers were striking against Mike Harris, if you're in Ontario. Mike Harris was a conservative premier of Ontario, and was trying to cut funding for teaching, probably like put into police or something. I'm kidding, I shouldn't say that. That's hyperbole, but like was cutting institutions that my family thought were important, like education, hospitals, things like that. So I remember going, and it was like very much in support of my teachers. I remember seeing my teachers there, which was also that visceral, like, oh, there you are outside of school, you know? But I remember feeling so like moved, or like I just felt really I think it's a really important thing to do with your kids. You know what I mean? I remember just feeling like very emotional, feeling very like, yeah, okay, if I believe something or my parents believe something, like you should show up for it. And I think that's kind of leads into what my study is. But I don't know. I guess like that was the one I went to when I was young. But I can't think of like the first one I went to on my own accord. Like I was brought there by my parents.
I'd love to talk about, I want you to do your study first, but when we come back after it, I want to talk about what you think about adults bringing young kids to protest in general. Like you kind of gave your opinion there, but I want to leave room to have that conversation. Is that cool?
Yeah. Oh my God. I feel like I'm definitely going to be the parent, like pushing a stroller into a protest. Okay. So what I have been researching about for this podcast, which I think is fascinating, is like the use of internet and algorithms. There you go, talking about the like seismology you were learning about. How can we track how many people are at protests in order to effectively keep a historical record of the amount of people there, but also build like pathways to be like, this many citizens showed up. Can we trace these numbers to ensure that they actually lead to action? So it's like, at first, when I was reading about this and the way that these algorithms are worked to actually like I was thinking of like a surveillance state kind of energy, that I was like, this seems sketchy. But then when I was reading it, it's like done by scholars, and it's very much designed for the purpose of making sure that the people who are protesting are, what they're saying becomes valid. And so do you know what I mean? Like, I guess
they're trying to validate the fact that there were X amount of people at a protest.
Exactly.
To say, wow, okay, this protest was actually huge. Sometimes these pictures may not do justice how you can compare this to this. And now we know this many people were at this protest and this many were at that one.
And even just being, and
historically, it's probably important to say literally millions or figuratively millions. You know
exactly.
what I mean?
And I think the first thing you kind of do when you show up at a protest is take in how many people are there. Like that's really what it's about. It's like, we just went to like a sit-in for Black Lives Matter in Toronto. Also, I would say it was for Black Lives Matter / defunding the police / abolishing the police. Like that's sort of like what people were talking about. And yeah, you show up and you go, oh, wow, okay. So it's like 2 blocks that way. Like you start to feel the energy based on the amount of people. And I think it is really interesting that that could have happened and ended. And if someone wasn't keeping track of how many people were there, all of a sudden the sort of meaning of that protest can dissipate. Like it makes you realize like that is what we're doing. We're showing out. They say people showed up in numbers. Right. You know what I mean? So I was like, okay, all these studies are really interesting to me. I get why these algorithms are important. But yeah, so protesting is so important because it's a way for citizens to communicate views on key specific issues often overlooked by people in power. And what they have also found, before I get into like more details, is that there have been way more protests since Donald Trump. Like, I think that's a really important thing to realize. Like, the fact that people are taking to the streets, it's because they're feeling the need to get specific key issues across, because this president, if we're speaking about North America, is obviously doing things that the civilians of the country do not want. Or if they don't want it, they need to make sure that they get their point across, that they have key issues that they need to be addressed, which I think is interesting. That is, I have, looking back, it's like the Women's March, March for Science, March for Our Lives, Families Belong Together, National Student Walkouts, global climate strikes. These have all happened in the last 4 years since Trump's been elected. So it makes you realize that there is something going on. I mean,
I totally agree. I think maybe even worldwide, though, it feels like climate strikes and things are not just related to Trump, but America has a huge impact on the world. And so obviously if America pulls out of certain climate agreements, that impacts how the whole world sees, and it destabilizes the ideas of countries working together.
Yeah.
But I do think I definitely don't want to give Trump a pass, but I think the whole world has become a little destabilized, it feels.
For sure. But I think even with climate strikes, like, you're going to be more apt to get out and protest if your president is like pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord and defunding the EPA. It's like those things are, he's treating
massive decisions that have huge impacts.
Oh my God, I can link. Oh, I don't even want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about Trump. So what these algorithms do is they conglomerate by literally just keywords. So say the word rally on a certain date. It scours the internet. It brings up all the photos of, let's say, Los Angeles for Black Lives Matter march. It'll take up all the photos. It'll kind of piece the photos together to get an idea of a geographic location. It'll, using an algorithm, sort of count the heads. And then it'll give you a sort of estimate of how many people are there. And then it goes into human review, because sometimes like rally is like a weird word that like could mean something else, that like it could have done some mistakes. It goes through human review, and then they come up with like very concise numbers for each protest. And one example is called Count Love, which you could like look up right now, and you could go and find even your city and find out, images and the amount of people who are actually there. Like the protest we just went to, tomorrow, hopefully, we could go on this algorithm and find out how many people are there. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
And they're really finding that because of these amazing, incredible protests happening around Black Lives Matter, they're just like, the algorithm's just getting better. They're getting more research. Like every time there's a protest, it's like helping this research to happen, and they're gathering more information. And sometimes they will send people like feet on the ground to interview and take like a case study to try and get an idea of like the types of
like
people
context
there.
And stuff.
Yeah.
Numbers are maybe only like give you so much perspective.
Yeah, which I thought was cool. Like, I mean, I always like shit on algorithms because like sometimes like they can be like something that is like dangerous or worth critiquing. But in this sort of scenario, I'm like, okay, that's a cool use of, data collection.
I imagine algorithms were first designed and intended for data. I mean, they really just are like collecting and analyzing data, and that would have been done probably mostly for science. And then those kind of technologies bleed into, or come even from like the military and stuff like that, but then start to bleed into like mainstream technology. And
I wonder like if it was almost like this idea came out of when like Donald Trump was like 7 billion people were
I know, someone was like, we are going to prove it.
We need to figure out how to make sure.
By the end of his term, we will know to the number how many are there. Okay, so I do want to ask you, and I know your answer is yes, you believe that parents can bring their kids to protest. And I think on the surface, I totally agree.
Wait, yeah. What is the...
I actually don't have anything against it until, and this is the hypocrite in me, until I see it in kids who I think they're being brainwashed to say things they shouldn't. So when I see kids that are like with the Westboro Baptist Church who are like saying like God hates like gays, and like when you see people who are on issues anti-climate change and you're like their kids are there and those kids aren't old enough to understand what's going on. I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, but you see what I'm saying? Like, I definitely think
obviously at a protest that you agree with, you're like, oh, I'm so happy.
In our minds, it's
here.
like a wholesome thing, right? Like, we're fighting for the environment, or we're fighting for Black lives, or we're fighting for justice in this world.
Wholesome is a weird word, I would say.
Well, I would imagine people believe those are justified things.
Yeah.
And as a result, think like, I'm not brainwashing my kid, I'm teaching them values. But then every now and then I stop and think, oh, that's what the other side thinks too. I know the other side's always different depending on what issue you're talking about. But
I mean, that's really interesting. Like, I'm just trying to think, like, there is a part of me that still thinks that the actual act of protesting, whether it is something for the other side, they're learning a skill, which is that if you fundamentally believe something, you can, as a collective, go out with people who are like-minded and have it be known to people in positions of power that you feel this way. You don't just have to sit back and wait for like a consensus bureau to come and ask you a question. What's your opinion on this? Like, if you feel passionately enough about something, you can create action and visibly show other people you feel this way, and maybe like plant a seed of, do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? Like, I think that's really important. I think we know we can't just leave things up to people in positions of power to make the right decisions for us as citizens. So I think that what I would say is like, I still think it's a good idea to show and inspire your kid that maybe when they're young, and say you are like, I'm trying to think of like, what is an example of a protest you don't agree with? Like when they were trying to be like, we need to open up the economy kind of thing. Like,
well, sure. I mean, that one's one, but there's lots of people who protest against like progressive issues.
Yeah, so let's say that it's like
gay marriage. People protest against that.
Okay, yeah. So let's say that it's like you're a parent and you fundamentally believe that gay people shouldn't get married. I think taking your kid there, you're still showing your kid that you're standing up for what you believe in. And then as your kid grows up, goes to school, starts to form their own moral view of the world, they at least have that skill now. And hopefully they learn that like it's not good to be oppressive.
I think that's a really good answer. Like, I think that's a really good answer. I hadn't really thought that perspective, because sometimes I think I get caught up in the emotion of it, but I do think that's a really responsible answer. And it is like, it is democracy. It's like, yes, people should be allowed to express their opinions and allowed to protest. And you're right, learning that mechanism, and that we do live in countries that are free enough. I mean, like right now, obviously this is debatable, especially in America.
Well, people listening in 5 years, like, they thought they were free. I'm kidding. We're going to get better.
Even we're seeing protests that are getting violent because of police and because of the government saying like, you can't actually be out here protesting, even though they're peaceful. But I mean, you're right. In general, regardless, a kid will end up forming their own views anyway, right? Like we all grew up with certain beliefs that were imparted from our parents. And some of those are probably hard to get rid of, but definitely I have grown as a human and changed my opinion from my parents anyway. And so you're right. Learning that protesting is an effective means to share your mind, talk to the government, and show like that solidarity in numbers. I think that is an important lesson to learn.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you for saying that. Oh my God. Well, it was a great question. Oh my God. Pat each other on the back.
So, okay, I'm going to go into my study next, but first we're going to do comment corner. But my study is about the effectiveness of protests.
Ooh, I'm excited.
Whether or not they work.
Oh my God. I really hope they work.
I know. Oops.
Comment corner.
Greg, I believe you have the comment corner this week.
I think this one's nice because whenever I do what this person says they do to our podcast, it always makes me love oh wow, I'm like not articulate. That didn't make any sense. Okay, so it's by HSPISME on iTunes, like Hispisme. People's iTunes names are so interesting. And
how do you even get an iTunes name? It's like, do I have one?
That's true. What is mine? Oh my God.
That's why everyone's weird. Like no one thought it would be a public thing probably.
Like this one's Crystal Cookie Cat, just for laughs. Okay, anyways, this person said, I may be an easy laugh, LOL, but these two kill me. I really enjoy their take on the world and how they mix research information with their discussion. And then the title is Laughing While Walking Alone. People think I'm crazy. And I find
I love that.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm walking and listening to a podcast, when it really tickles me and I laugh out loud in public, I think that's a nice sight for someone if they just see someone laughing like in the street. That it makes me feel really nice to think that someone might actually do that with our podcast.
I think so too. Like I didn't grow up listening. I guess podcasts are more popular now, so it was only
none of us grew up listening to podcasts, babe.
Well, and you're right. I guess like the idea
radio?
of laughing on your walk was not really like listening to something wasn't possible. So I feel like that even only started happening to me in the last couple of years. As I, now I take the dog for a walk or I'm walking outside, I listen to a podcast, and that only just started happening to me for the first time in maybe the last year, where I was like, this is so funny. It's so funny. Usually I would be embarrassed to be laughing listening to something because
you're in your own world and you feel okay with it.
And it's actually, there are some podcasts that I just find so funny that it goes past the public shame. Like I'm a pretty reserved person, so I always am aware like, oh god, people are watching me, but then I am just like, I laughing feels so good.
And what do you mean public shame? Like what a beautiful thing to see someone laughing.
I know, it's just because
I've
grown up in like a reserved kind of like, oh, you don't want to like, I don't know, affect people around you or something like that.
Well, speaking of protesting, maybe that's why you weren't at protest. That's interesting.
Well, I mean, I grew up in a small town of Napanee. What's that?
Grew up in a small town of Napanee. You know what? Always stay.
No, I'm happy to protest now. I just mean in general, you are not always aware of your body.
No, that's true.
And there are times when I'm like, you are offending people around you because you're too loud. Obviously,
that's
I'm
so
the other
mean.
No, like not all the time, and a lot of times it is beautiful because it's actually like you have this ability to be very authentic and just express your feelings, or I don't know.
That's a nice way of saying I'm loud.
You are a loud person, and sometimes I can tell people are like, you're being loud, but then sometimes I can tell people being like, that's nice. Anyway, all that to say, that's such a nice comment. I'm so glad we could bring that for some people.
Yeah, and just so you know, that song we randomly started singing was from Avril Lavigne's hit first album.
You don't think everyone knew that after the first beat?
I don't think everyone knew that. I think
I'm joking.
Oh, okay, because I'm like, the fact that I'm obsessed with that lyric is something I think you've just like had to like picked up, because I'm like, it's so her first album is incredible. Can I speak to the manager? My other podcast, we will get into Avril Lavigne. Let's move on.
All right, we're back to protesting. So I found my study really interesting, and I think you will too, and I think everyone will. So there was an analysis that came out of economists at Harvard and Stockholm University. Whether or not it's real.
Those are some smart places, Sweden and Harvard. Yes. Okay, it's probably white AF, but it's smart.
But smart. They were basically trying to figure out, are protests successful at what they try to do? And so the main question was, can protests cause political change, or are they actually just a symptom of things already changing, right? So the question is like, are people protesting because the world is already moving forward?
Or are they protesting out
or does the protest cause the change?
Wait, say that again. It almost sounds like the first thing we talked about, moving forward.
It's a little, okay, so yeah, the question is, does the act of the protest, so what we just went to, said that was an isolated event. Okay. Will that protest cause change, or was it the result of change? I mean, that's maybe for like the Black Lives Matter, not obviously these are being protest to cause change, but maybe those protests wouldn't have happened 15 years ago because the public conscious wasn't ready to do that change and it hadn't already changed.
Oh, okay.
So I'll give you the answer, but then I'm going to give you the study, which I found so interesting because I was like studying something that I found interesting. So what they found was that it can cause change, but it's not because they send a signal to policymakers or the protests themselves cause people to change their minds. It is because protests politically and motivate and activate the people who are there. So being at a protest makes you more likely to become politically active and motivated. And as a result, that is where the success from protests comes.
That's so interesting, because that goes back to what we were saying. It's like, you should bring your kid to a protest. Because it's literally saying that, like,
it teaches you to like get engaged,
to make sure you vote. It teaches you to make sure you're a politically engaged person. Huh.
So the way this study, I think this study took place in 2013, but it was looking at the Tea Party, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, like an American party that formed after the 2008 crash. So they formed in 2009.
Do we know why it's called that?
So I laughed at this. Well, first of all, it's like, what a stupid name. The Tea Party. I guess it's based off of this idea that the British used to tax America for tea during like the American Revolution. And that was like in Hamilton, the musical, they talk about like getting their tea taxed. Okay. And it's like the idea that the government is overreaching even when people don't want them to be.
Oh my God. Isn't it wild that we're still dealing with this same ideological concept? It's like, okay, that's so interesting. So they're called the Tea Party to be like, the government needs to get their hands out of our pockets.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to like over pretend I know a lot about the Tea Party, but I think their main platforms are like fighting against tax.
I thought it was like
Anti-tax.
an acronym like T, like terribly educated assholes or something like that.
Whoa, did you just think of that?
I did just come out of my mouth, but like I feel bad. Does that mean? Do people hate? No, the Tea
Party is like
a
a very, very right-wing part of the Republican Party that mobilized really effectively, which we're going to talk about.
Okay.
So they only started existing in 2009, which I didn't.
Yeah,
realize.
no, I read
so
it,
that was because I guess their response to the government being irresponsible, in their view, caused maybe the recession, right? I don't know if that's
no. I actually have read about that recently, and yes, it's because after the 2008 recession, the need to bail out banks, like seemingly by. Like at the time would have been a Democratic Barack Obama. I'm like, don't say anything bad about Barack Obama, but interesting critique. Like hearing it now, it's like, okay,
bailing out the banks, was that the right decision?
And that's a really way, like we all are talking about that even now during COVID. It's like, it is awful to think about these people getting bailed out of these institutions and like getting
when others are starving and dying and like
So it's like an interesting. I think that it's important that we talk about this. Like that is something that we had issues with.
Oh, totally.
Like, you know what I mean?
Do.
The banking
Even now,
bailout.
hearing that they're bailing out companies before individuals and companies that maybe have like stockpiled on profits and what do you call it?
That's kind of an interesting thing to say right now. It's like, so where's the Tea Party at right now? You know what I mean? It's like, we know that Donald Trump has very much not regulated this money properly. That's gone to bail out a bunch of rich companies. That's what the Tea Party came out of. So I mean, I
assume there's other layers here because I think the Tea Party is like a very. I don't want to speak out of turn. I think it's like a religious right movement.
Yes,
so like it's founded on the idea of tax, but I'm sure it permeates other cultural ideals.
But it did really come out of that recession story. Sure. Like the fact that 2009 is the date that it started makes sense because they were mad.
So the Tea Party mobilized by creating a tax day protest on April 15th of 2009 across the country that were very successful. I think they brought out like 800,000 people or something like that.
Whoa.
I think that's across America. They estimated, they would know better with your technology, but I think it said the estimate was like between 400,000 and 800,000 people protested on that day in America.
Wow.
And so what the study was able to do is that they realized that rain impacts how big a protest is. Oh, no.
Maybe try, but at least I'm protesting. No, May. Okay, yeah.
So, to study, they realized that in cities that there was rain, attendance was roughly 60% lower on average. So they started thinking, this is a good chance to measure places that it was sunny have bigger protests. Will they have a bigger impact?
Oh my God.
Will the number of people at a protest actually implicate the legislations, the elections, the government that gets formed in those places? And so these were the results. So places that had less rain had more people, and at the end of the day had substantially higher turnout for the Republican candidate in the 2010 congressional election. Specifically, every additional attendee at a tax day rally led to somewhere between 7 and 14 additional votes for the Republican in the next election.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
It makes sense. You know what I mean? I'm like, that is such an interesting way to talk about it. It's like, if you are at that protest, you are going to be more you are going to vote.
Because you're engaged and you're hearing speeches and you're seeing people and you're feeling part of a movement.
And also, it's like, imagine going to a protest and not voting after. Like, that's like, wow. That's, you know what I mean?
But you could be brought to a protest. It kind of goes to show, like, if you can get inspired. Because it's saying, it led to 7 and 14 additional votes. So that probably means people are, the people at the protest go and talk to their friends and go and talk to people around them and are really impassioned by having been at the protest. And it's interesting that where it was more rainy, less people were probably spreading those messages. And so it wasn't as effective.
This is really interesting because I think maybe it's a variety of reasons, but we have gone to a lot of protests. I think protesting is really important, but I've never been able to explain why. Mm-hmm. I've never felt like I should drag anyone to a protest for some reason. I've really been very cautious, being like, friends, I'll be like, if anyone wants to go, I'm going. But I'm never like, you should come with me, right? Because I don't know, because I don't know why. And
yeah, maybe it feels you don't want to overstep and force someone.
I don't even know. I haven't even thought about it. It's just a reaction I've had as like as a primate, and it's just a thing I said or didn't say. Now, because of that information, I'm like, I think I'm going to be a little bit more like,
come with me. Yeah.
I need you to come with me.
And I think it's different too when it is people you know and love and they trust you. It's not like you're trying to throw them into something they don't believe in. Most of the times they're protests that our friends and family like agree with, they're just not necessarily coming.
But I think that this is an interesting way of rallying action and saying, I want you to come with me because based on studies, it's a way of us all making sure that when the time comes to actually do something that's necessary, for example, let's just use the literal concept of voting. When that voting day comes, you're more likely to make sure you get there and vote. You're more likely to go talk to your parents about it's going to create a political action within you that's going to make the difference. So it's like, I think maybe sometimes people go, well, I don't know why I want to go. Like, I have my job. It's not really like worth it for me. Like, obviously I support the cause, but I'm not going to go to the protest. If you can be like, well, actually you taking that hour or two out of your day to come is going to create this impact. It's actually going to make you be more politically engaged. It just takes 2 hours. Come with me. That's the reason. And then it maybe will allow them to go, oh, okay. Yeah, or even if you can just have the language around why you're convincing someone to come with you. I think I'm going to use that because I do think that, especially right now, we are at a moment in history where it's like, if you aren't politically engaged, it's a bit of a red flag right now. Because I think about, I could think of specific people in my life who are just kind of like, almost the idea of like, oh, I don't want to talk. I don't want to. Yeah. And
like,
it's like,
oh, it's too much.
Well, then you're actually relying on other people doing the work for you to be safe in your life. Like, things are
you're already safe and you have the complacency because it actually doesn't affect you.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of selfish.
That's exactly. It's like either it's selfish, but also I just think it's like, I don't think that, I guess you're right. That was never really a valid argument, but I'm also just like, can you not see how important it is that we have like effective political institutions right now during a pandemic, during a civil rights movement, during an actual like time where if we don't address inequality, like we're screwed. I guess it comes down to climate change. I guess it comes down to all the things I think about all the time where I'm like, why aren't people not freaking out? But okay. Whew,
no, I totally agree. I think it's reading this study fully changed my not perspective, but I was just like, wow, this feels really powerful. It makes me want to, even this study made me want to be more politically active because you're like, wow, there's evidence to show that getting involved, not even just for the reasons you would think that are like going and educating people and being impassioned. It's like it actually leads to results, which I think maybe is also a reason why people don't do it, because they're like, oh, I totally support the cause, but they're not seeing the cause and effect. They're not seeing the chain of how the protest ultimately turns into change.
Yeah.
And so I think knowing and having this as a piece of sort of ammunition to say like, no, it actually does. You getting involved in politics and you even just going to protest and supporting and being a body there and then also being impacted by what's happening has a real effect.
And it is interesting, like just being at this like this protest, the signs, like they go viral online and like you can still have the impact of seeing a sign just like on Twitter or whatever, but just being around, seeing these people, seeing young people just like showing literally in a sentence what they think, it's powerful. Like it makes you go, yeah, like it just, I don't know how to describe it, but I could see how even just bringing someone there who's not politically engaged, just being around people, humanizing this idea, seeing people's signs, it just like creates, I can imagine energy within a person that it is probably smart that you bring your politically non-engaged friends to a protest just to make them politically engaged. That's really cool.
Yeah,
that's really
I'll
really
wrap
cool.
it up by ultimately saying, so to reiterate, it's not actually the protest itself. So like the results aren't because of the protest, it's because of what they do to the people there. And they also realized that the larger the protest, the longer the impact lasted, because they were trying to test this hypothesis that, oh, well, and if it was about the moment, then it would fizzle out and you'd see like this differential between like it being really important at one moment and then actually never really not coming to fruition. But if that moment was impacting politicians, it would then fade. But what they found is The difference in political outcomes actually increased over time, so a larger turnout for the initial protest had lasting effects on voting, political contributions, ideology, and future participation in the Tea Party movement.
Okay, so that's for that specific
Yeah,
study.
but obviously that would be applicable likely to other protests as well. And yeah, it makes me want to be more politically engaged. I know we are, like, we talk about it, but we aren't necessarily actively engaged in being physically engaged, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, then I'm happy. I'm glad you came to the protest with me.
Me too. Yeah.
And I think that also, I'm so proud of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Like, it is just, it's
and
incredible.
for the people who have persevered through like having to be compared to different, I don't know, I just feel like when it even happened in Toronto, the Black Lives Matter movement a few years ago held the Pride Parade in Toronto. That was very controversial, and I feel
like... explain that better. It would held like they...
So the parade was moving, and I think there was a sit-in to stop the parade as a moment to say, hey, Black Lives Matter, and also they had demands to remove the cops at the time from the parade.
Incredible protest.
Yeah, but at the time, people were like shitting on that. Like, not everyone. Lots of people supported it.
Well, this is an interesting conversation because I will say that this concept that you're talking about with protesting, and even the one I'm talking about, like large gatherings, like we can picture them. I started to think, just like near the end of you talking earlier, was like, but there's different forms of protest, right? Like deciding collectively to not, say, shop on Amazon for a day. That might actually have a more, like, that's a different thing than what you're talking about, because that's still a form of protest. It's a form of like using like economics to stop something, and you're not I mean, you're
not like conglomerating,
but by participating and say it's just like not shopping for Amazon from home, doing that, it's still maybe going to make you more politically motivated in the future. So
possibly. I actually don't know. Like, obviously the study was looking at specifically that one day of protests and the result that came. Because those results could suggest other types of protests do the same thing, but
because that Black Lives Matter protest was so effective, I remember thinking, what an incredible way to get your point across, to have people discuss intersectionality, to 100% allow people to understand within the queer community that, like, we are not all free. Like, this is not
like why we can't all be celebrating in this way, without acknowledging the people who are still abused and have to fear for the fact that who they are.
But my point is that was that the reason that, like, definitely white gays, like, were like, I know people who were upset about that, was because it was a different type of protest. It was a very effective way to stop a celebration, to get a lot of media attention, to demand something in the moment. Honestly, like, that's so smart that I think that's separate from that study, right?
Sure.
Like, that's not about a large group of people coming to, like, getting your friends out to join the movement, to vote. It's actually a very effective way of thinking about how can you create a protest to actually create action.
You're right. There's many levels to protests being strategic and smaller groups being effective.
And that planted such a seed. I just think
to think of how far people have come to know that we have many people in our lives, maybe not many, but people online we've seen that would have had problems with that sit-in, who now are probably like really shouting Black Lives Matter and understand more.
I remember my dad,
and that's good. I think that it's nice to see.
I remember it was a discussion. I remember my parents were in that parade. They were marching it, which is so funny. It's like, why was I watching it? My parents were in it. But they were in that parade. And I remember it was like, it stopped. Like, people were confused why it had stopped. We were there. We were at it. It was, people were confused why it had stopped. Like, people were tired. Like, there was all these things happening. People were getting cranky. Everyone was like, I just want to get day drunk or whatever. And I remember that, like, because I'd said hi to my parents in the parade, they had, like, moved on. My dad loves Now magazine, which is a very, like, left magazine in Toronto. And I remember him coming to our office and, like, putting the magazine down and, like, looking at me and being like, I need you to know that, like, I am in support of the Black Lives Matter protest at Pride. Like, but it was one of those moments where I bet, like, it was people had to figure out in that moment what they felt.
For a lot of people, it was the first real encounter with that.
Yeah, and he was in it, and I'm just saying, like, I never heard his opinion prior to him saying that, but maybe he was like, what's the hold up? Or, like, I don't know. But I'm like, even me, I remember thinking, okay, I'm at Pride. I'm in a good mood. This is happening. And I had to, like, kind of just sit with it and go, okay, wait, no, they're right. This is what I think. But then it is interesting to think that now we're all like, well, yeah, do it.
Yeah.
Like
looking
it's like,
back,
it's
crazy.
not that long. And so, again, proud of the Black Lives Matter movement, because they they haven't changed their course. And the fact that we are now during Pride realizing and saying everyone's putting a black fist in front of their Pride flags is like, okay, we have come tangibly in Toronto a far way in 3 years. And I just think like this movement is incredible. And it is, I know, a really tough time for a lot of people. And it's like horrible to see viscerally people of color and black people getting murdered by police. That's disgusting. And like, it's obviously a sad time, but I also think this is it's a net positive right now for society. I hope. I say that all the time. And then I go to bed and I'm like, I hope.
I think it is. I hope this is like a seed for people who are out there who want to be politically active and motivated. Know that you're doing amazing work, and if you're not yet, go out there and just be part of something. I think I feel more motivated. I think the big struggle for a lot of people sometimes is not knowing where to start, and I feel that sometimes like I want to be more engaged, and a protest is a great way to be engaged because you don't have to organize it. You can just show up and like lend your physical
and learn. Like we got so many
voice.
flyers. We talk to people. Like you start to go, oh, okay. People are here to say help me.
I think I would love to start exploring more. Like, what are the next steps? We're watching that show right now. I can't even think of the name of it.
Miss America,
which is all about like the feminist movement. And I find it really interesting because it's kind of an inside look at movement and how they organize. Obviously, it's not that detailed. It's more of a drama to tell the story of these particular women's lives. But I'm just like, are there groups like that in Toronto? There definitely
for
are.
Sure.
I know. And I'm like, how come I feel so disconnected? How do I find them? How do I get engaged with that? How do I have people help me to say, how can we use our platform or who we are to like start actual groups or be part of things and bring people to things? And I don't know. That's the next jump for me.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I'm ready and happy to
You're right,
protest, but how do I get to that step?
Yeah, because I feel like what I do a lot is I'll research those things and then I'll just like give money. But then that's not going to make me necessarily more educated, or that's maybe what made me complacent and not dragging my friends to a protest.
Empower you.
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
I think being part of a community and a group that has a mission and a goal and a strategy and fighting for human rights will make you feel empowered and make you feel like you're doing something good in the world. And so that's a commitment that I want to make, is I want to figure out how to do that. I mean, obviously now during COVID, it's kind of a little harder. There's not so many groups getting together, but I think it's a good time to figure out how.
Cool. Well, yeah, no, I think this is, you just saying that inspired me. We're inspiring each other. This is a very complimentary episode to each other.
Oh, yeah.
I love you.
Well, I hope everyone else feels a little bit inspired, because we sit in a position of white privilege to be able to not have had to think about this for that long.
Yeah, and to
not be so super politically engaged unless it came to certain LGBTQ issues. But even then, we're in a progressive city. Like, we've grown up in a very safe place. And I'm sure there are people who have obviously not been so lucky and might hear this and be like, you're so fucking lucky. But I just hope there are other people out there that find solace in the stuff we've been talking about and can be politically motivated, and not just for their own self-interest. Like, it's of course important that we fight for queer rights, but it's even more important that like we have queer allies and that we are Black allies and we are allies for other people, because at the end of the day, like, everyone deserves to be freaking equal and have equal opportunities.
And I would say, even just acutely as like a white gay from Toronto, the main history of white gay men in Toronto's oppression is through the police. It's through the bathhouse raids. It's through moments where we didn't feel safe because of over policing of ourselves and our lifestyle. So I think that's something that I want to continue to speak to. I'm being generalizing now, but to other white gays of privilege who I sometimes have a hard time talking to about what's going on right now in regards to policing. That is a connection I made the other day when we were getting interviewed, was like, that was the struggle of the white gay man. Mm-hmm. It was bathhouse raids. It was the way that the police were treating us, not me. Obviously, this is generations earlier. So now, to make that direct parallel to now, it's like, if a community is having issues with the police, that should make you as a gay white man think, okay, whoa, this is when it is my duty to stand up for these people against the police, because that was exactly what was necessary for us. And that was the revolution that was needed. And then also the other thing is like the AIDS epidemic is something that's so interesting, because that is a virus that was killing people, gay men, more than the rest of the population, and we were screaming about it. And we see who the virus is killing right now is people of color, and they're screaming about it. So I'm just like, there are these parallels that if you are a white gay man, I'm going to
yeah.
speak for myself, then, and you are choosing to ignore those issues, that's really sad because it means that you are ignoring your own history.
Preach. Well,
I always try and like not get too intense and then all of a sudden
I feel like right at the end.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. I think
Okay.
you're passionate. I think this is all, we're all learning and getting not excited, but impassioned and empowered by this stuff. So I think.
I can't. Oh my God, next time we're interviewing Online Kind, the drag queen who teaches math on TikTok.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Thank you guys for listening. # Side Note Podcast if you want to let us know what you think, or you can comment on the YouTube video for this. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Yeah.
Peace.
Bye.